Hello, everyone, and welcome to Profiles in Risk. I'm your host, Nick Lamparelli. In this episode, I am very pleased to introduce Phil Reynolds. Phil is the co-founder and CEO of BriteCore. BriteCore is a company building enterprise software platforms that coordinate and manage administrative functions for insurance companies and MGAs. Phil, welcome to Profiles in Risk.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'm happy to be here today.
Yeah. I have to tell you, you got the perfect microphone. I got to get one of those.
A
Awesome.
million years ago, before I did insurance, insurance, there's a famous joke in insurance that nobody intended to go into insurance. It's an accident for all of us.
That's right.
And I actually started out my career as a professional songwriter and studio engineer and ended up in insurance software. And now I run one of the larger insurance software companies in the country.
That's
and,
awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, from a songwriter and a children's songwriter. Nonetheless, so most obscure career path in history.
Okay, let's not forget to touch that topic before we end this podcast. So to kick it off, I want to give you the opportunity. I gave my description of what BriteCore is.
Yeah.
In your own words, could you describe BriteCore and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So BriteCore is a collection of services that we have built that target insurance processing. And so, technically as a platform, that's what it is. But as a company, as a mission, as a vision, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build services that target the general use cases in insurance, and then, tunneling down into specific use cases, but specifically deliver software in a way that is lighter weight, that is more connected, that centers around like a microservices architecture. And so all the things that you think of in terms of like legacy software and insurance, it's slow, it's hard to upgrade, it's incredibly expensive. We are trying to solve those problems for the insurance industry, utilizing the best of what modern technology, modern software practices are, and bring all of those to the insurance industry.
Awesome description. Clearly, there's a big nut there that we're going to crack.
Yeah.
So now I want to get back.
No small job.
I want to get back to children's songwriting. So how does someone that was doing that transition over to someone that's in that boring insurance industry? Please connect those dots.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, it's a relatively boring story, I think. But I used to work there in recording, but my degree in college was electronic media production, which included digital music production and also digital design. And so I, on the side, would do websites with my cousin, and I was the designer, the front end guy, the JavaScript guy. And we got asked to do software for a bank, and one of the board members on the bank was the CEO at a mutual insurance company. Asked us to do a quoting system for his agents. They loved it. All his buddies called us, quit our jobs, started our company, started doing quoting systems. Got up to like 24 customers, and a few years in, and a bunch of our customers came to us and said, "Hey, we like our quoting systems a lot, and we really hate our back-end processing systems. Would you be interested in replacing all of the admin functionality that we do?" So, policies, billing, claims, data warehousing, policyholder self-service, all those things that we do now. And so one of the cool things about the way that our company got its start is that we were not backed by like a big venture firm or something who said, "Hey, we're going to go tackle the insurance industry." Instead, we were a very organic movement that arose from within the industry itself. The industry said, "Hey, there's a need. We, the industry, players in the industry, will go, we will sponsor this, we'll fund this, and we'll make this happen." So one of the things that I think has been an advantage for us from the beginning is that we've always had client need squarely in our focus, because we were, that was our genesis. We came from a client-sponsored initiative. And so that has driven a lot of our subsequent culture in the company to sort of have a ruthless focus on client success. How do we make the client successful? Make the client successful, make the client successful. We almost never talk about, quarterly profits, or, we don't even really track our growth all that carefully. We're growing really fast, but that's just because we're just focused on, how do I make you, my customer, awesome? What do I do about that?
Yeah, no, and what I think is most interesting about that is you didn't have to hypothesize about what your clients wanted, because they literally asked you.
Yes. Yeah, they handed us like, do this exact thing. Now, it's interesting because it also it's a liability as well. because the original customers that came to us were the smallest of the small customers in the insurance industry. So those early mutual insurance companies were writing like $3 to $5 million in premium, which is very tiny by insurance carrier standards. So the original versions of BriteCore that we built targeted a very small premium volume use case, which has all sorts of ramifications for permissions and business rules engines and configurability and all those different things. So unlike in sort of like a Guidewire, Duck Creek, some of the really big players, they normally started in like a claim system or a rating engine, and they did it for the really high end of the market and then slowly expanded their footprint into new verticals. We started in all the verticals, but at the smallest possible scale. And we've been just like growing, the overall in each of those verticals like this as we go. And part of why our company is receiving a lot of press right now is that in the last year or so, we hit sort of that critical mass point where our capabilities in a lot of those different modules are such that now significantly larger insurers are starting to look at us, and we have this integrated suite that does all the things. And so it's just been a really interesting, totally backward story. And, I was just working at a recording studio and happened to get asked to do a website for somebody. So
And the rest is history.
Yeah, and it just unfolded from there.
Okay, so could you talk about your suite? And
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to really dig into the administrative part of an insurance company, because I'm going through that now, and I don't think there's enough attention. It's talked about, back office. It's kind of like a bucket. These kind of, oh, that's back office. You throw it in there.
Right.
But you mentioned all of the different silos. Could you talk about all of the important back office functions and administrative functions that occur at an insurer or an MGA that now BriteCore has to take into consideration?
Oh, absolutely. No, I could do that. So there are a ton of them. Just to give you the high level. So BriteCore is currently one of the major things we're doing in our own ecosystem is we're rebuilding under a true microservices model. So I wouldn't even have time to go through and list out the 300, 400 microservices that make up BriteCore. But a lot of those microservices group together into what people would think of as a standalone product in an insurance value chain. And so that's probably the scale that is useful to talk about. So to give you an example of what some of those products look like, we kind of divide them up into 5 different categories, and they're all 5 different pieces are critical for insurance operations. The first one is your infrastructure piece. So you have to be able to actually deploy an app that you build, and it has to coordinate, it has to talk to itself. So in that sense, we have 5 major products in there. There's BriteAuth, which is your centralized authentication system. So I log in, I know I'm you. It issues a JSON web token, the token that gets passed around to all the various microservices to say, hey, you are you and you're logged in. There's the BriteAccess product, which controls permissions and access controls. And there are various levels of access controls. You get route level access controls. Can I access this resource in the network? Yes or no. Can I access this record set? Yes or no. Those are record-based permissions. You get field level permissions and access control. Should I see this field? Should I be able to edit this field? And there's a few others as well. There's quite a few layers to access control. There's BriteHub, which is a centralized event manager and message bus that lets all those different services talk to each other. There's the BriteCloud infrastructure, which is where we have a centralized service registry that turns around and deploys all the other pieces. And then we have BriteVendors, which is an integrated framework for all of your back-end services to talk to an external service. So say, for example, like LexisNexis has credit scoring. If you want to talk to credit scoring, you need a centralized brokerage that manages that communication in and out. So those 5 are infrastructure. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm mute again. If I could interrupt you.
Yeah.
In the infrastructure element and the ability and making sure that you're the person who's logged in, right? Mm-hmm. Are there external pressures on an insurance company or an MGA to really have that tight and controlled? I'm guessing regulators want to, but could you give just a little bit of backstory of this? Isn't just the insurance company looking to, put in a password or whatever. What are the external pressures on the insurance company to make sure that data is incredibly secure, and security, people that are coming in and out that is protected from that data?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of those things. In terms of regulatory pressure, New York just passed a new requirement. The EU's just passed a new data law. And a lot of the new legislation coming down requires, for example, MFA. And so you have to have so MFA is multi-factor authentication. It's like when I log into the site, then I also have like a text message that validates on my phone, yes, I'm me. That's one strategy. There's multiple MFA strategies. So if your authentication system doesn't support MFA, right out of the box, you're out of compliance in like several states and in lots of nations in the world. So that's like an example of external regulatory pressure. You also have, obviously, with the ongoing slew of security leaks that keep happening in logins, there's a lot of pressure on companies to justify and validate how and why you're being secure. And so in our world, we deal with carriers and MGAs. On the carrier side, they are really accountable to the regulators. The MGAs are in many ways accountable more to the carriers, but the carriers don't want to. They are accepting the whatever the security vulnerabilities of the MGA are. If the MGA has direct login and they're binding business, and so it ends up being a pass-through problem. So that's an example. The other kind of pressure that you have is market pressure, and I'll give you an example of one of the things that BriteOff does. At this point, it's relatively accepted that if you have a modern login system, you're going to support federated user identities. And federated user identities means, for anybody who's not an engineer on this podcast, that's when you say, hey, log in with my Facebook account, or log in with my Google account, or log in on a SAML, some authentication service outside of your system. And so it's a way of linking accounts together and saying, oh, if I trust this other authority, I trust Facebook. So if I'm logged into Facebook, I trust that Facebook has done their due diligence. They have MFA and those things turned on, and you are actually you. So I go ahead and log you into my system now. So that's another major pressure on people. If you go to a site at this point, and it doesn't have a login with Google or login with Facebook, you're kind of like, this is kind of jank, And so the point of a system like BriteCore, those are just those infrastructure pieces. There's a bunch of other pieces. Is that we are trying to say, hey, if you utilize our authorization service, you get all of that, right? All those things are automatically built in. It's all automatically there. And so then it's a question of, do you want to utilize our interfaces, like our user interfaces? So we deploy all of our services with front-end tools that you can just stand up and expose to your users. Or another major thing about the way that we feel that all modern services should be architected, and I think everyone agrees with this in computer science, is your service should be a true web service exposed to an API. And then we deploy a standard interface that you can go use. You can also build your own user interface, and you can just talk to our API. And so a lot of our users now will do things like they'll build their own mobile app or their own consumer website, and then they'll hit BriteOff as the authentication mechanism. So it's doing all the heavy lifting. It's issuing the tokens, it's doing the federated user identities, but they control the screens. And so that's just a very specific example of utilizing a platform to power functionality that you would want to create. And I can tell you, because we just recently overhauled BriteOff, to give you a sense of the engineering effort that goes into something like that. I had a team of 7 people that spent 14 months rebuilding that one service. So, when you think about at the individual insurtech level, or even at the individual carrier level, does each insurtech want to devote 7 people for 14 months to building out a robust authentication system? Or do you want to go plug into one that's already been built for you that's targeting the insurance use case?
Yeah. So I'm going through this right now, where we go and we talk to carriers, and I was surprised at how much emphasis they put on policy management systems. What are you using? Just a lot of quizzing and questioning and then auditing on that part of it. And I always thought policy management system is you can just have a database with a PDF file and there's your policy. So I would like to learn more, because I actually don't know a lot about policy management systems and the intricacies, the things you have to worry about, which sounds like you need to be able to do endorsements and premium related stuff, connect to rating systems, and give us a flavor of the type of that your engineers and your product managers have to think about when not necessarily designing, but maintaining your policy management system.
So let me go through. I'll list off the rest of those product offerings. So each of those products group in microservices. I'll give you a sense of the workloads that kind of BriteCore manages. In addition to the infrastructure, I just said, BriteOff, Bright Access, Bright Hub, Bright Cloud, and Bright Vendors. Those are the 5 infrastructure, but there's a bunch of others. So then you have core processing. And core processing, there's 5 products there. There's Bright Lines, which is the ability for a system to go in and define insurance products, underwriting rules, forms, version those things, inheritance across geographic regions, managing user access and controls to the insurance definitions. And then that also includes, in our universe, a rating engine. So another really, really complicated part of insurance is rating your policies, especially if you do large schedule commercial policies. That's a significant processing overhead sometimes. We have policies right now that have, when we first build the dependency tree for rating, there's over 3.5 million forks in the dependency tree, individual nodes in the tree that we have to all rate in parallel. So here's an example of how big those can get. Then there's Bright Policies. Policy admin is the component that issues policies, cancels policies, renews policies, processes endorsements. Notable in endorsements is, and this is something that insurtechs are really sometimes struggle to consider right up front, is the tremendous complication down the road of out-of-sequence endorsements, especially out-of-sequence endorsements that are committed into a prior policy term. So when you're standing up a new insurtech, new MGA, you're thinking about getting the system live, right? But once you get it live, then you have to actually administer the policies. Those policies are going to renew in a year or even in 3 months, depending on what your policy terms look like. And once those policies start renewing, you're in new legal agreements at each renewal. But you are still required legally to process endorsement changes back into prior terms. And so you have to go in. What makes insurance processing and policy admin so different from like a banking system? In banking, everything happens in real time. It's transactional time. You never go into your bank account and say, oh, 90 days ago, actually my account balance should have been this. Now rewind and replay all the transactions. It doesn't work that way. That blows your mind to think about. In insurance, that's exactly what happens. And so you have to be able to process multiple overlapping out-of-sequence transactional records and calculate the difference between them, catch them all up. And then those things synchronize over into another product, Bright Billing. And billing is where you say, okay, here's your coverage, here's your premium difference, here's all the things that happen there. All that has to flow through into a billing system. And the billing system in BriteCore is huge. It does an enormous amount of things. Examples of the kind of things it would do is, let's say you process that out-of-sequence endorsement into a prior term. There are all kinds of settings in it for, do you want me to bill right now for the difference in the prior term, or do you want me to take that difference and aggregate it into a remaining installment? Do you want me to only do that if I can calculate the earned premium, the amount of earned premium I've collected in prior billings is positive, and if so, aggregate it into a future endorsement. But if that amount is negative and I'm actually behind on my premium, go on ahead and bill now. So there's a million things like that go into the billing system. You have to be able to support things like combined billing. What if a policyholder has 7 different policies, but they want to get one invoice? Well, that's actually a really complicated problem, because what if all of those policies have different due dates on the invoices, but I still want to get one piece of paper? Now I have to have a debit system that tracks multiple overlapping invoice due dates and cancellation dates. And there's regulations on a geography basis for when I can cancel the policy, what notices have to go out when I cancel the policy. And so I have one policy let's say I have a policies in 11 different states and I want to get one invoice. There's different business rules on cancellation in each one of those 11 policies, those 11 different states. After you issue the policy, then eventually something's going to go wrong. You have a loss, and then you need a claims management system. And claims management systems have to be able to track, not just the basic, the claimant and the reserves. You have to be able to track things like loss events that are macro events that then contain sub claims. For example, let's say you're insuring a school bus slips off the road, flies into a house, and a bunch of little kids are injured. Maybe there's some fatalities. You have a bunch of different types of claims being filed against possibly different policies with different coverages, and the different adjusters get assigned to it. And there's litigation that goes into some of those and not into others. And so there's a ton of complexity in the claims system. And then finally, in our core package, there we also have Bright UI, which is what I told you earlier, just a user interface, right? There has to be a user interface that communicates with all of these services. And we stand up one that you get for free in our ecosystem, so that you don't have to go build all those screens. You get screens that you can use if you want to use them. So that's just the 5 in core. And there's another 35 service products that we have that go way on out past core.
So you probably are required, your salespeople probably required to do consultative selling, because you have so many different products to plug in. Like, who would have thought that just a policy management system would be that complicated? But that's one of the things that I think a lot of insurtechs that are coming into the space don't get. It's just like, it's even, my co-founder, he laughs when we go give a pitch. He's like, I always thought a policy was just a piece of paper.
Yeah, no, it's not.
right?
So I know. So actually, I'm in an interesting position in the industry because BriteCore is really popular right now, and it's developed a reputation for being a really good system for MGAs and insurtechs, in addition to a bunch of the carriers we work with. And so I think, I may be wrong about this, but I think I get just about every new startup MGA in the country calls me for a demo. And so I have a chance to meet at least most of them. I don't know if I get 100%, but I probably get 80% of them reach out to me and talk to me. As a result of that, I have an opportunity to kind of understand who is coming online, what their value prop is, what they understand, what they don't. And one of the things that I'm working on in my own company is, at the moment, we only work with 8 to 12 customers a year. But I am taking right now, in the last 12 months, I've done in my CRM system, I've taken 246 inbound sales lead calls. And so out of 246, I end up working with between 8 and 12. And so I'm actually responsible for myself for a lot of filtering down our sales pipeline, and who are the people who we really think do understand what's going on. And one of the major things that I do in the process is I interview the founders of whatever the startup is, and I say, hey, tell me what you know about out-of-sequence endorsements. Tell me what you know about when your reinsurance layer is divided by peril group and you trip over into a cat layer for one peril group but not in the other peril group. And oh, by the way, one of your reinsurance treaties is a 3-state treaty, and the other one is only a 1-state treaty. But you have this commercial policy that happens to exist in both states at the same time. How does that work for you? And what I'm really doing is I'm just listening to them talk to understand, do they understand the business that they're getting into? And so one of the big pieces of advice I give to a lot of MGAs when they call me is, look, if you don't have someone in your office that really, really understands insurance processing and the complexities, I would highly recommend finding someone like that and bring them into your founder group, because it's a major, there's a lot hiding out in there, like
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah. My co-founder Jim wanted me to ask you, knowing that you were coming on, and us going through this problem right now. He wanted to know about BPO, and I was like, "What the hell is BPO?" He's like, "Ask." He's like, "He'll know. Ask BriteCore if they do BPO for policy management and billing." So, does BriteCore do BPO?
Okay, yeah. So BPO stands for Business Process Outsourcing. And what it means is, do we have people on our staff that are the operational processing staff in place of you? So for example, you wouldn't have to staff claims adjusters. We offer you claims adjusters to do your claims adjusting. We do not directly, we're not directly a BPO provider. We decided that we toyed with the idea for a while, but unfortunately, a lot of the BPO providers in the industry, if you track them, I've been doing this now for 14 years, I guess. I've been in the industry, and I've watched a number of BPO providers come up, grow, and then crash and burn and go bankrupt over and over again. And it's because that service work is a very tricky business to manage, because the volume of it is so sporadic. And you can get, for example, a really big customer out there, one of the tier 1 customers can come through, and you can triple your revenue overnight in services, and all of a sudden they change their mind, and now you're closing up shop. So we made the decision that we didn't want to get into the BPO industry. However, there are other partners we work with who are good at BPO, who do that, who have training in BriteCore. One that we really like working with is a company called Tech Mahindra that is actually really good at this, and they have a very sizable staff.
What was that name?
Tech Mahindra. We've been working with them recently on several projects, and they do great. They have 1,900 people on staff. They're insurance trained, full insurance professionals, and they do a lot of BPO outsourcing. And one of the things that we do to try to really help the people who do the service outsourcing work with us. Another partner that you work with, if you're in my industry, is BPO is on the backside. After the systems are live, you need someone to run the systems. But before that, another partnership that sometimes people will want to engage is what's called an SI partner. And that's a service implementation partner. It'd be somebody who can help offer you services to get you live in the first place. Now, we utilize SI partners quite a bit less than a lot of the other software vendors in the industry. A lot of them rely heavily on SI partners. We use SI partners more where we still manage the project, and we use SI partners to augment our staff, not really to run the implementations. There's a lot of reasons for that. That's kind of our perspective on it. But TechM, for example, one of the things that makes them nice is they are both an SI partner and a BPO provider. And so the way that we work, another one that we work with a lot that's really great is a company called Nest IT. They're really good as well. We really like them. And what we've done in our ecosystems, more about, trying to build an ecosystem that actually captures the value of modern software practices. So one of the things that I think also that the computer science field has spoken on many years ago now is that closed source software is generally bad software. Like in general, if no one can see the source code, but these 11 engineers, there's probably a million bugs and security vulnerabilities and all these other things that no one's addressing because it's all behind a closed box until something goes really wrong. Mm-hmm. And so we're big believers ourselves in open source software. And so one of the things that we do that's really, I think, somewhat unique in the industry is that while BriteCore is SaaS, right, centrally deployed, managed in AWS, all those things, we allow all of our customers and our SI and BPO partners, anyone who's a partner with us, to contribute directly to source code. And so we have SI partners, BPO partners, and customers that are in there saying, hey, we'd really like to see this new workflow exist. Oh, we found this, queue that isn't processing the way we want. Oh, there's a security vulnerability in your authentication mechanism right here in this one particular corner case. And we try to empower all the people in the ecosystem to go in and do something about it themselves, right? So they can ask us to do it. But if we're busy, if we're on something else and it's driving you nuts or you want to see a new value chain, go do it, because that's the way that's the best way to do it. It always scratch the itch that you have is kind of the philosophy.
Yeah, and that would be probably very beneficial or valuable to insurtechs that are coming in either as a carrier and MGA, where there's tech blood in there. Like they have some tech expertise, and so anytime that they can contribute or write code or connect or clean things up, they're usually eager to do that because they want it their way.
Yeah, one of our customers is really, really good at this. A customer called Jetty, jetty.com.
Very familiar with them.
Yep, yeah, Jetty, David and Joe Kim, they're all awesome. They've been a customer for several years now, and BriteCore powers the back end of Jetty, and they're a really great customer because they're all about high transaction volume and zero downtime. A lot of our carriers, they have business hours. At the end of business hours, there's nightly processing, and everything goes offline for 2 hours while we run processing and fire it back up. And when we first started working with Jetty, they're like, no, we're 24/7 direct to consumer. And we have, we're going to be taking tens of thousands of rating requests, an hour or something. And so we need this always on, rolling upgrade sort of like strategy. And they were a really good customer who came in and pushed our team in a really healthy way to work on our availability of the system. And so, it's just one particular example where a customer comes to the door, and because they have access to source code, because we really collaborate back and forth as our teams, again, because we're customer centric in a very big way, it produced a lot of benefits, enhancements to our DevOps infrastructure and our deployment architecture, working with a customer who had that need. And then all the customers have now benefited from that because, again, it's a centrally managed SaaS system.
No, that's it's just so incredibly complex. I would like to ask you, which administrative functions can get an MGA or a carrier, I don't know if there's a difference on this one, get them into the most trouble if they screw up?
Oh man. So the really big ones, endorsement processing, which I already mentioned, is huge. Another really, really big one is people do not take into account what their billing regulations are from a cancellation procedure and from an increase in premium endorsement. And you can get fined, like several states will fine like $50,000 per infraction for any bad invoice you send. And so it can get wildly expensive if you push out a bad software release on certain invoicing practices. That's a really big one. The one that I actually see the most common, the one that people really don't think about until they're later in the chain, is their data warehousing. Because once you write your first policy, your very first policy, every single person up that value chain. So let's say you're an MGA, it's going to be your carrier. If you're a carrier, it's going to be your reinsurer. If you're a reinsurer, it's going to be the reinsurer that's backing your reinsurance policies, right? Because that chain bubbles up until you get to the exchange, and then I'll cross reinsurer. But as you go up that chain, any entity up the chain wants 4 million pieces of data from you because they're the ones ultimately backing your risk. So they want to understand what you're doing. And then in addition to that, if you're in the carrier side, you have to produce statutory reports, you have to produce statistical reports. There are all these reporting mechanisms. And here's the fundamental challenge. Insurance is a heavily fragmented industry. So the reason that there are 300 new insurtechs a year, 500, however many there are, and there's a zillion carriers out there, is because each one of them is doing something unique. They're not doing it the exact same way, right? So in banking, when you go, like the way that checking and account balances work in banking is exactly the same, right? There is no variation in how I calculate your account balance. That is not the case. There are 6,000 different ways you can process any particular transaction in insurance, and they're all doing it very differently. Here's where that gets to be a major, major disaster for an insurance company who's not thinking about this problem. You go through, you build a value prop, a workflow, a use case, a product model, or whatever it is that you're going to build. It's your unique value chain. And it's all based upon your unique little data points and your unique processes, and you come up with these new words. Awesome. Day two, you have to report on all of that. And guess what? Every single reporting agency in the world has a standard data file that you have to report in. And if you don't, you get to close up shop. The state comes in and shuts you down. And so you have to come up with a way to get your non-standard processes and data models and rating structures and all the things that you're doing mapped back to standardized reporting and output. And that is a tremendously complex problem to solve. We spent about 2 years here. I had a dedicated team solving that one problem on how you build data mappers for your data warehousing. And that one I've seen hose a lot of startups. They think it's really innovative, really great. And then day two, they have no way to extract the data and report anything, and they just get shut down. Like, nope, you can't do this.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It's not, it doesn't surprise me. It's wild in that I didn't know about that. It's wild in that I think most insurance professionals don't know about that.
Right.
And, just it almost seems like all of that regulatory function is just like cloaked. And some, there are a few people that have been with the company for 20 years and they're over in that corner and nobody ever talks to them. That's what they're doing, is like saving the company. And so
it's really true. And you'd be shocked how many multi-billion-dollar carriers you go in, and there are only 3 people in a back office somewhere that have any idea how this works. And if this goes offline, the whole house of cards burns down. It's just a dumpster fire after that.
Right.
So that's where I think that's the compelling value proposition. So circling back around to where adopting, when and where you can, adopting a standardized system like BriteCore, doesn't have to be BriteCore, it could be anything else that does this, where someone like myself, we're supporting a broader set of use cases. We are required to think about these problems ahead of time. And so the thing you buy with a system like BriteCore is, in some ways you get up and running faster. In other ways you incur new debt because as a really lightweight startup, you still have to engage the complexity of a real system, right? That's supporting really big, because we have really big customers too that do all kinds of complexity. And so it's a yin and a yang, but the thing that you're mostly getting is you can be reasonably confident there's not some giant thing hiding out in a corner that's going to come up and bite you, because if there were, we would have already thought about it,
Yeah. Legacy IT. I worked at a carrier that had several different legacy IT platforms, mainframes, systems that didn't talk to one another.
Yeah.
When a carrier calls you and they have that issue, what do you do?
They all have it, and it's a byproduct of a thing that there was a trend with buzzword that started up in insurance, I don't know, maybe 25 years ago, even before my time, that was best of breed software. And everybody went on touting best of breed software, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad word. But what it means is I'm going to pick a different system for all of those little things. And I've only given you 10 of our products. There's like 50 of them. There's tons of workload that I haven't even talked about. And they go around, they pick individual systems for all those things. And they think in the demo, they're getting all the best features for all those different things. And then they get some killer feature in one of those little modules that they want. The part that no one calculates in the sales process, and it's shocking when you're in my position, is, I have to make all these systems talk to each other. And that is wildly service intensive, resource intensive, incredibly prone to error. So the situation that most carriers are in is that they have anywhere from 4 to, literally the worst I've seen was like 200 and, I remember it was like 230, 240 back-end systems that were running, doing all these different workloads that all needed to be communicated with. And there are the issue that happens is those teams that are responsible for implementing that get in a hurry. And when they get in a hurry, the very first thing they don't do, the first thing that drops off the radar is documentation and testing. So then all of those API integrations, all those service integrations, they only exist in two people's head in that back room. And then one of those guys gets a better offer for another job and quits. And the other guy wants to retire and can't retire because his old system's around. He wants to get out, but he doesn't know half the things the other guy knew that already left the company. And then literally no one knows how it works. And so the companies get paralyzed and they won't change systems because they're like, oh God, I don't know how this works. And if I touch it, all my documents quit printing, or, whatever the case may be. And so that's the situation people find themselves in.
Yeah, I've seen situations where that happened, and what they end up doing is they hire a consulting firm.
Yeah.
And I've been in one situation where only the consulting firm knew how the system operated and how to pull data out. Yeah. Only the consultant. There was no one in the company that literally knew
anything about it.
Yeah, and it was a risk management issue in that at least by having the consulting firm do that part of it, there was some confidence or some security in that, like, okay, they can't screw up, or else they're it'll kill our relationship with them. But that's incredibly scary. And things that I've heard and things that we talk about, things that we're nervous about when we're talking about this, is we don't want to end up like that. Yeah. So it's it's such a critical decision to get your platform correct. But as my co-founder and I talk about all the time, is we don't want to get stuck. We're very cognizant of making sure our platform allows us the flexibility to do certain things, because we don't want to be one of those legacy companies.
Yeah. So the advice I would give people on that front is that, number one, best of breed is, again, not a bad word. It's not a bad concept. It's that if you're going to adopt that concept, it is important that you follow through on it, which requires an enormous amount of budgeting for time and money on documenting all the interconnects, testing the interconnects, making sure you have a regression test suite that backs it all. And then you can actually migrate, because you know what all your API endpoints, you know what they do, you have tests that back them, and then you can treat the service like a black box. But if you don't have that, you can't. So that's where I tell most companies who aren't, Liberty Mutual or USAA or some massive company that has a lot of resources, I tell most people, hey, it is probably in your interest, if you're a little bit smaller than that, to try to utilize unified platforms where you can, because then it's on the vendor to make sure that their individual components talk to each other. It's not on you. Whereas if you go best of breed, it's now on you. It's on your internal team to determine that all the interconnects are working really well. So that's one piece of advice I would give people. Make sure that you utilize platforms where you can that are integrated. Number two, if you go best of breed, or if you fragment your platforms, do so intentionally and test the interconnects and make sure that everything has API-driven access and you know exactly, it's all documented. The third piece of advice I would give people is that when you are going with fragmented resources. So again, in BriteCore, in my universe, I have all these individual products, and each one of them is its own standalone microservice that talks to the others. So we actually have, 50-ish products that are totally standalone. So it's like I'm talking to 50 different vendors, but I just am the vendor in all those cases. So when and where you can, I always advise DevOps teams, look, design everything in a true service-oriented architecture. And there's a bunch of rules in computer science about what that means. A good example would be, don't have your policy system and your claim system talk to the same database. Once they're talking to the same database, there are undocumented interactions you don't know about. Always make them talk via API. So there's a list of things there that you, from a computer science perspective, you want to do to make sure that your individual product streams, your services, are truly segmented and separated. And then if you do all those practices, then it's a totally safe thing to do. You just, you cannot go fast and cheap. You can't always go faster, cheaper, and do any of those things well. And if you don't, you might get live quickly, and then everything will explode on you a year from today.
Yeah, we don't want that. So I'm going to ask one more business related question. Then we're going to transition over to the personal stuff. Next generation of policy administration systems. Again, this is a question for my co-founder. Digital, cloud-based, client server, all of the above. How do you think that BriteCore is going to have to evolve to handle the future of business, the future of the future of insurance business?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on and simultaneously in parallel. Here are some of the big ones. The first one is I do really believe that every modern software vendor should be working as aggressively as possible toward a true microservice architecture. And by true microservice, I mean fully orchestrated. All of your individual business workloads function as standalone black box services, because that's how you keep from getting stranded with a legacy platform. You can upgrade individual black boxes one at a time, and that way there's smaller domain expertise required to move forward. So I think that's huge. Microservice architecture, I think, is massive. I think clearly it's not new anymore. It used to be new 5-10 years ago. Everything should be cloud-based at this point. Like nobody should be maintaining server stacks in the basement or anything like that. We also shouldn't be using floppy disks, not that either. And so I think that's a relatively self-evident thing. I also think then the other big thing, so that those are kind of infrastructure architecture at a really, really high level. Product-wise, I think one of the big challenges is that we are seeing a major shift in the industry toward more direct consumer interaction. And that necessitates a lot of infrastructure shift and a lot of product level shift in terms of what capabilities you're exposing to what user, and then how do you expose it. And that the trickle down from that is a lot of security procedures, a lot of marketing and branding, a lot of sort of controlled user experience that provides a delightful user experience for a consumer. Whereas an agent maybe who's receiving a commission is willing to put up with some irritating things in your system. A consumer is not going to do that for 2 seconds. They don't care. They'll click onto the next site. So I think there's a lot that has to happen in terms of making sure that you're enabling delightful user experiences. And then kind of probably the last thing I'd point out there is that as we move forward and as things get more and more as the nature of the products that we're writing is shifting, there are some fundamental assumptions about insurance and the data model behind it, and then in turns how you report on it. All of those things that are necessary. I'll give you a really good example. Most, if not all, of the policy management systems I'm aware of, including BriteCore, our fundamental assumption about how premium is earned is that premium is earned on a daily basis. Every day you write $365 in premium on a policy, and each calendar day that goes by, you earn $1, and then another $1 is unearned, right? And so you start with $365 unearned on day 2, $1 earned, $364 is unearned. Next day, $2 is earned, $363 is unearned. And that's sort of your fundamental assumption, because that's the way insurance has worked for a long time. But now we have a lot of companies trying to push usage-based insurance value props, which is great, awesome. I mean, I think everyone can see the benefit in usage-based insurance. The trick is, how do you report on it? How do you say how much premium you wrote when you don't know how much premium you wrote until they hit the starter on the timer on this mobile app that somebody's walking around with in their pocket? And written premium reports are a standard thing you have to produce for every single state department in the country. So there are a lot of very significant back-end processes that I think all of us at the forefront of the people thinking about this problem are, how do you bridge some of the obvious value chains that could be there? How do you connect those to what is essentially a legacy reporting environment, a legacy sort of data model, and bridging those? I think that's one of the huge challenges that needs to be solved for modern insurance right now.
So I lied. I'm going to bring up one more business. Kind of the topic du jour is blockchain. What do you think of that?
I might be a contrarian on blockchain, unfortunately. I understand blockchain very well, and the value of blockchain is when you do not trust an authority. Okay, so the only reason to ever use, because blockchain is a vastly more expensive data store than a standard transactional database. And the only reason you would ever store something in a blockchain is because you do not trust a centralized database, because there's no reason to pay 10 to 20 fold for the same transaction to put it in a blockchain unless there's a reason you don't trust any single database, at which point the consensus voting mechanism in blockchain now has a value chain. Okay, so in the majority of insurance use cases, you do trust the back end, right? I mean, like it's not like you have an insurance policy with a big carrier, and then you're like, well, I don't know that that carrier generated the right invoice for me. I need to put that in the blockchain so I can validate that the invoice you sent me is really the true invoice. That's not a real business need out there right now. And I have a lot of people that call me and say, well, tell me what you're doing with blockchain. And I'm like, I mean, I can articulate really cool value props for blockchain, but none of them are the things that most people call me and ask me about. Because, I just ask them over and over again, why don't you trust the backend system there? Like, what is the thing you don't trust? Now, having said that, I'll give you a couple of examples where blockchain does make a lot of sense and where I can see big potential for it. Because again, you don't necessarily want to rely on a centralized service. One example would be if you're doing cargo insurance, all right? And you do not, as the insurer, have control or access to whatever the inventory tracking system is for the shipping company that's putting cargo into those cargo containers. If they file a claim and say, hey, 30 cargo containers were lost at sea, it's a $52 million claim, these were full of diamond rings, you want some way of knowing, did they in fact put diamond rings in there? Now, if you could get the shipping company to write a data store directly to your database, in that case, a centralized data storage would be a perfectly acceptable solution. But if you can't, and you want to only validate that information at the point in time that there's a loss, then writing those things into a blockchain is a perfect way to say, no, you told me it was in this container. This is what was in the container. You can't go back and change your mind now. So that would be a really good example of where blockchain would be valuable. Another one that I'm shocked no one is tackling right now, but it seems like an incredibly obvious one to me, is that I can't fathom why the insurance industry has not yet adopted that we would all be doing statistical reports into a blockchain, right? Why do we all rely on a couple of centralized authorities to gather and collect these statistical reports? It would make a lot more sense if we were all just writing that data into a global blockchain, everyone subscribed to the blockchain, and then you can do what you want with the data. I think that would be a really awesome use for blockchain. But outside of just a couple of uses, man, I can't think of a reason you'd want like your invoicing system to go in a blockchain or your premium system to go in a blockchain or anything like that. I have a hard time articulating where the value proposition is there.
Good. I like the answer. Thank you. This is the part of the podcast where we transition and learn a little bit more about you and not just your brilliance and what you do on a day-to-day basis. But,
I'm far from brilliant.
who you are. And I already know that you used to write children's song, which is awesome. I put my kid to sleep last night doing Itsy Bitsy Spider.
That's awesome.
So I love kids songs. When you aren't working, what do you enjoy doing?
Yeah. So obviously I have the music thing that I still really enjoy. My wife recently, about a year ago, picked up mandolin lessons for myself and my son. My son's 11. And we started taking them together. And so I've really enjoyed doing that. I'm a big Chris Thiele fan used to be in Nickel Creek. Now he's in Punch Brothers. And he's a virtuoso mandolin player. And I've been learning to play some of his stuff. So I have that. I enjoy that a lot. Love exercise, like to lift weights, have a whole kind of a CrossFit style gym in my basement and like to go running and do things like that. And then I like to scuba dive a lot. My wife, my son, we scuba dive. We're on vacation. We love travel. We travel frequently. We went to Iceland not very long ago. We went to Kosovo pretty recently. We're heading to Alaska in a couple of weeks to spend like a week or two hiking just out in Denali. And so, yeah, just anything that gets me out and doing something, because as a career, I spend most of my time sitting behind a computer talking to people about insurance. And so kind of when I get some downtime, I mostly want to do just something to just get out and be active and just stretch my legs and look at the pretty mountains.
No, I love that. That's great. What tools or techniques do you use to stay productive and or organized?
Yeah, so there are a lot. So we're a heavily remote team. Our staff is 170 at BriteCore today. And we have the biggest central office we have is where I'm located in Southwest Missouri. And there are only 32 people that live in Southwest Missouri. And we have an office here that I go into once every 3 months. I pop my head in for an hour and I say, hey, you guys still here? Is the office burned down? No, it hasn't. Okay, good. Awesome. I'm out. So we're really remote. And as a really remote team, productivity tools are really important for us. And one of the ones is really obvious. Everyone's picked it up at this point, I think. Slack is hugely valuable. because it lets me keep track of all the various conversations going on in my company. Now, Slack can also get to be chaos. Our company has 7,400 Slack channels active at any one point in time.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot going on. And so, I obviously don't track all of those. I track like 200 of them myself, but even 200 is a lot to keep track of. So that's really helpful. We utilize a couple of other things. I really like to use Clubhouse right now. That's my project management suite of choice. It's lightweight. It's really nice, and it lets me sort of sequence and organize work. It's really quick to set up projects. And so I utilize project management suites, even for things that are not software projects. So I know what's going on. So ticketing is really valuable for me. So I can go out and look and see what all is out there. What should I be doing? Another thing that I find incredibly valuable is in our company, we standard issue MacBook Pros to everyone in the company. And we do that just so, not because Mac's, better than PC or anything like that. I don't care about that. Actually, a lot of my engineers just run Linux virtual boxes, run Ubuntu virtual boxes on their Mac. That's all they do. But the advantage of having the Mac is by having the same operating system, we can adopt the same tooling. And so we have standard tools that we utilize across the company. One of those is in Slack, you have video conference, but also we utilize Ring Central, which is actually the corporate version of Zoom, which I think we're using right now. And what it does is it enables, everyone has it. It's on all of our toolbars right up top. And so I know it's on everyone's computer. And so at any point in time when I'm like, hey, I want to talk to them, I'm talking in Slack, I'm like, this would be easier to say. I just click and bam, I'm looking at it and I'm talking to them regardless of what country they're in, what time zone they're in. It doesn't matter. And so I find that to be a really valuable tool as well. We also made the shift several years ago. I actually sent out an email. It's a famous email in our company where I said, if you send me one more Microsoft document for any reason, if it's a docx, if it's an Excel file, I will fire you. Like that is you are fired for that. Do not ever send me that.
Not even Excel?
No, none. Absolutely not under no circumstances. Because Google Sheets, so far, no one has ever shown me something that I would need Excel for. Google Sheets doesn't do it. You'll just take 5 minutes to learn how it works. And the reason that there'll be someone listening to this podcast is like, no, Excel does this one function. It's the killer feature. So, which is fine. I'm sure you have your feature that's awesome, listener. and please keep using Excel if you want. My company, I said no, and there's a reason for it. If you are going to be a remote distributed team, collaboration is absolutely critical. And the problem with Microsoft files and it's in Excel files around is every single time you send that file, now you have another version of that file sitting on another laptop. And who knows what the most recent copy is? Who knows if there's an edit stranded in someone's local laptop copy? Yeah. So by forcing everyone to go to Google Docs, maybe you lose some formatting, maybe you lose a function or two here that you wanted. You have where all the documents are, there's only one version, there's one centralized copy. We can all go, we can comment, we can edit, we can see the history of revisions and edits. And so that is tremendously powerful for us. And then we have a whole suite of software tools we use surrounding all those things that are used in Vision. We use all sorts of things to like help. But the main thing is we focus on collaborative web-based tooling internally so that there is no penalty for being at any particular location on any particular time zone. Everyone is able to be productive, and there's no reason to go into a physical office for any reason.
Yeah, no, that's cool. We're struggling with that now. Google, I had to open up a Google Sheet. And I was like, can you download that to Excel? Because I don't think I'm going to be able to use it. So it was, anyways, that is the collaborative effort. We are very remote as well. I'm in a home office. So absolutely. We chatted about this before we started. So let's finish off with books and what books you have found influential. First of all, are there any marketing materials, books, whatever, that can help a listener with insurance back office related stuff?
Oh man, insurance back office is really tough. The best thing you can do there, and it's a painful thing for me to say, is the institutes, the INS courses, or if you really want to go deep, which I've done, the CPCU courses, which are the equivalent of getting a CPA. In insurance, I've done all the CPCU courses myself, so I really understand insurance well. But they have another series called the INS series that is like 100 hours instead of 3,000 hours. Here's all your insurance basics.
Specific towards that back office.
It is specific towards back office related function, and it's an interactive tutorial based online. So that is the best thing you can do if you want to learn about insurance. Go do that.
But besides that, books that you found influential. in business and or personal?
Yeah, so
Doesn't have to
books
be
that
just
are really
business related.
foundational for me in the way I think about the world. So these are not insurance books. These are
Yep.
thinking about it in an organization. I have a laundry list of a lot of them, but the four that I normally will tell people, if you're like, hey, give me a few books that I should really read, and I say, okay, if I were you, for me, these are the four most influential books for me. The first one is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which I know is a very popular book. It was like, New York Times bestseller sort of thing. So it's well known. That's a book where he basically explores all the logical fallacies and where we are not rational consumers all the time. And I think it's important because I'm a programmer, I'm an engineer by background. And so I have a tendency to want to build systems and organizations that make logical sense on paper. And I draw out the flow chart, and this is the way things are going to happen. And then when things don't happen that way, but I can explain why logically they should, my brain wants to explode. I'm like, why isn't everyone doing what I want them to do? And so I have found that book to be wildly helpful because it helps you understand why people sometimes do just irrational things. And then you can understand why they're doing it, which then helps you sort of try to design systems that encourage them to do the rational thing, to be empathetic towards them, so that you can really get everyone moving in the same direction. So that one's just huge. If I only had one book to recommend, it'd be that one. The next one that I really enjoy is a book called Tribal Leadership. Tribal Leadership was written by a range of authors, but the three that are listed on the front is Dave Logan, John King Halley, and Fisher Wright. And that book is all about how migrating yourself and your team from a middling performer to a high performer to then somebody who actually quits caring about whether or not I'm a high performer and everyone says, look at me and look at my accomplishments, to making yourself good at caring about making your team a high performer. And then finally about how taking your whole organization and saying, how to make the world a better place. So it's all like these stages of trying to lead people through what you could sort of call like the actualized career, right? Like, what are we trying to accomplish at all? Like, what's the point in doing any of these things, right? Why do any of us go out and start a company in the first place? Why does insurance exist? Why do we wake up and do our jobs every day? And it does a lot of helping shape how you think about helping people channel towards what for me matters very much, which is I want us to be a force for good in the world, in the insurance industry, but in the world in general. And so I care about that a lot. Another one that I really, really value a lot is The Fifth Discipline by Peter Sengi. I've done a bunch of the MIT Exec Ed stuff, which for anyone listening to the podcast, if you haven't done the MIT Exec Ed stuff, it's readily available and you can go do just like a week on site there and get several credits that you pick up just by going there for their Exec Ed program. It's awesome. Peter Sengi is one of the professors there at Sloan, and he wrote an entire book on being a learning organization. And about how to make sure that you are the sort of company that's constantly asking the why and challenging your norms, and then even a framework and a process for doing that and enforcing that and making that be institutional memory and habit. So there's that. I love that book. And then the final one that has been really foundational for me is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, which was also a bestseller not too long ago. The Power of Habit is great because it really focuses on how people will do whatever their habits are. It's nice to think that you're going to tell people to like think above the moment and rise to this, idealized version of how we should all react and respond. It's not true. People do their habits. They 98% of what we do is just habitual. And so that book is all about how you identify and shape habits and how you change habits so that people begin behaving and doing the things you want them to do because that's their habit to do it, not because they have to stop and think about it and, utilize emotional energy to try to have the right response. And so for me, those four books are foundational in my thinking about how you build and run a company. And across them, they represent a pretty good, spread of the sort of some of the concerns you think about. There's a fifth one that is not, I'll throw out, I'll half endorse. It's called Nonviolent Communication, and it's a little touchy-feely. So I won't fully endorse it because the scientist in me is like, that's a little touchy-feely, but it is an excellent book. And Nonviolent Communication is all about how you handle people who are mad and hot and are angry about anything, and how you redirect the conversation in a way that de-escalates and builds consensus instead of elevating. And I find that to be, it's useful on a daily basis for me. So
that's incredibly valuable. I love the list. The Power of Habit's been recommended before. I haven't picked up and read it, but as you were talking, I couldn't help but think of a sports analogy. And, I play a lot of basketball,
Yeah.
and whenever in crunch time or in a situation where there was, a competitive element to it, I would always float to my habit, which would always get me into trouble. I remember I spent like an entire summer just working on my left hand. I got so good at working on my left hand that I would always use my left hand when I got stuck, that I couldn't break myself out of it and go back to my right hand in certain situations.
That's
So,
so interesting.
uh,
Yeah, you build that habit, and then it's just what your brain maps it.
yeah,
And we do that same thing with the way that we talk about customers, the way we talk about our own product, the way we think about our own success. Those things are all patterns in our brain that get burned in there. And every time you reinforce the bad habit, you're making it that much harder to do the right thing. So leaders have to really care a lot about. It's just like being a coach. It's the same thing. You're
yeah.
right. It's exactly like basketball.
Awesome. Awesome. Phil, this has been a fantastic hour. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. We will be in touch. So thanks for coming on and with your awesome, you completely embarrassed me with your awesome audio setup. Now I'm going to have to get the dangling microphone. So I appreciate you coming on and educating us.
Absolutely, Nick. Thank you very much for having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Okay. My guest this week has been Phil Reynolds of BriteCore. Take care, everyone.